job interview is one of the most anxiety-provoking situations most people can find themselves in, even when they go to plan. But what happens when you have your worst interview ever? Our guests share their worst interviews ever in the hope that you will take something from their mistakes to have a more successful interview outcome. Some of the stories are horrific and some are just downright embarrassing. Let's join our host, Kevin O'Reilly, the interview skills coach with over 25 years' experience in the fields of coaching and recruitment. Let's welcome our guests to the show.
Today's guest is the only man you'll meet who worked on Europe's highest flare stack, helped launch missions to Mars and Mercury, and somehow still found the time to master the saxophone and public speaking. James Robert Ferguson, better known as Bob, is an engineer turned speaker coach who once hated public speaking so much he probably would have rather gone to Mars himself than give a talk. But after 30 years in Toastmasters and winning 3 district speech contests, Bob now helps scientists and engineers ditch the jargon and communicate with clarity and confidence. He's the author of Great Technical Speaking, It's Not Rocket Science, even though in his case, it kind of is. He's keynoted conferences, delivered a TED Talk, and toured Pakistan to help tech professionals find their voice. Oh, and don't be surprised if he slips a saxophone solo into his presentations sometimes. Bob, you're very welcome to the show today.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Nice to be here.
It's a real privilege and a pleasure to have you on. Where do we find you today, Bob?
Well, I'm at home, and as you can probably tell, I'm in the man cave. This is my domain in here, and I'm not sure if you can see. Just to the side there is my lovely tenor sax down there, and next to it a guitar. So I'm a big fan of music, and it's really interesting to see the parallels there are between music and public speaking as well. You find all these things are connected. So this is my homeland.
And for those of our audience that are listening in, what Bob has behind him is stacks of books, probably hundreds and hundreds of books, and he has his guitar and his saxophone just off to his right hand side. And Bob, we have known each other for some time, and you actually helped me on my own TEDx talk experience, which I will be forever grateful for, Bob, because it was a challenge.
Yeah.
It was a challenge, and it was nothing I had ever done before, nor thought I would ever do.
Yeah.
But you have had that experience of being on that stage as well.
Yeah.
And it's one of those moments that you never forget, I think.
No, that's right. And that's really the reason to do it. I think you will come across people there who are real experts at TEDx talks and get millions of views and do it. For me, it was always really about the experience. It is a very different experience speaking there. Now, I don't know how you found it, Kevin, but it's different in the sense that they video it because obviously they want to put it out on the TED platform. You only have one take. You can't go back and do any retakes. So you've got to get it perfect that first time. And I think that's what adds to the edge. And you will find when you're speaking at work, you will often find yourselves in that position. I know your expertise is interviews, but if you're giving a pitch, for instance, you've got to get it right the first time. You won't be allowed a retake if you muck it up. So the discipline of working through the TED Talk, I felt was invaluable in its own right. Any views that come along or anything like that, to me, are a bit of a bonus.
Yeah, for me as well, Bob. It was the journey, and quite rightly, when you're up there, what happens when you're up there happens when you're up there, whether you get it right, wrong, or indifferent. However, the build-up and the resilience that I personally have felt from taking on that journey is absolutely life-changing.
Yeah.
I feel like I could do anything now.
Yeah.
Literally, I feel like I can do anything now because it's one of those moments in your life that you've seen. It's a worldwide organization. You've seen it and you've heard them, and especially in our line of work. And you understand the accolade that comes with that of being a TEDx speaker. It's absolutely huge. But some of those disciplines, as you quite rightly said, even with regards to the music, regards to the public speaking and the TEDx, Some of those disciplines are really useful in interviewing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And I have found that myself personally, that they're really, really helpful. So Bob, take us back, because I don't want to skim past this whole idea that you worked in the space industry
No, sure.
on something that went to Mars and something that's went to Mercury. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about you.
So I never set out to be an engineer. Engineering was, like most of my life, completely unplanned. I'd like to say I was very good at planning these things, but that's not how it worked out. I started off in my first job as a draftsman, and I'm not going to tell you about the interview that happened there until a bit later, because you may be interested in that. And I never really set out to be in engineering, but it's the way things fell with those early jobs. But once I got into it, I absolutely loved it. And I went through a whole variety of jobs. I started off in specialized structures, which was with Norwest Holes, cooling towers and grain silos, big reinforced concrete structures. But I only ever did two proper jobs in my life, as my mother used to call them. And I realized the company life was not for me, and I became a contractor or a freelancer. And the thing I really loved about being a freelancer was that you had this set of skills, a basic set of engineering skills, but every industry would use them in a different way. And you had to sort out how to use your skills in a way that suited the company you were in. And you had to sort it out fast. People used to uh, expect you to arrive on the first day and sit down and start working. There was no introduction. As a contractor, you don't get any induction or anything like that. Here's your desk, get on with it. In fact, at one stage, I worked for another aerospace company, Marshalls in Cambridge, and there they expected you to turn up to your interview with a pencil and a
Hmm.
calculator. And then they would give you the interview. And if you passed the interview, they'd say, "That's fine, your desk's over there, get started." You never went home after the interview. You just got
Well,
on with your job.
at least you didn't have to wait 2 weeks to find out if you've had the job or not, or got the
Oh,
job or
no,
not.
no, that's right. And so two things happened, really. Firstly, I became very adept at interviews because in the early part of my life, I used to keep going for interviews, and I found the energy and the excitement was a good prospect. I used to enjoy it. And so sometimes I would go for a job interview, even though I had no intention of taking the job, because I just thought, keep my hands in. And it's what you were saying about saxophone music, public speaking. They all rely on practice and building the skills. So
Mm.
actually going for random jobs that you thought were vaguely in your field and you might as well throw your hat in the ring was a great way just to keep yourself on your toes and working out what to say when you're in that interview situation. So I went through reinforced concrete, the specialized structures where I started. I went into the oil and gas industry, which is where we built Europe's highest flare stack, which was an exciting thing to see go up. And then I went into, where did I go from that? I went to into aviation. I went to Marshalls, and I worked on a lot of the early Airbuses in there. And then, and one thing I worked on there, which surprised my family, I drop these things in. I don't like to give them too much information in case they know too much about me. But we were in Swanage on holiday, and the Red Arrows were the show. And we were sat on the grassy bank watching the Red Arrows, and one came round belly towards us and flew across the front of us. And I said, I worked on that pod because underneath the Red Arrows hawks, there is a pod, and the
Okay.
pod contains all the diesel and stuff that they throw out the back to create the colour blooms.
Oh.
So, and the family sort of all stopped and looked at me as if I'd grown another head. But I have to say the thing with aerospace is you get involved in lots of exciting projects. It's really interesting work. And then after aerospace, I eventually ended up, I went into air-to-air missiles, which again was another exciting interlude. And I ended up going into the space industry. But once I got into the space industry, I felt that I'd found my home there. And I really enjoyed the work and the challenge of building new things, because as I always used to view communication satellites as something that were pretty much a fait accompli. We knew how to do those. They'd made 25 of them already. So building another one was not a great deal. But when you're working on deep space missions, then there's nothing that's gone before, nothing that gives you a guideline. So you're almost starting with a blank piece of paper and saying, what can we design that's going to suit the brief on here? So I always felt it was a very challenging part of my career, but it was fascinating at the same time, and it made you think differently. So I absolutely loved that. I say I worked on the missions to Mars. That might be a bit in advance. That my Mercury mission is
Mm-hmm.
currently looping round Mercury, slowing down, ready for orbital insertion, which will be in 2026, December 26.
Wow.
The
That
Mars
that
rover.
must make you very proud.
Oh yes, absolutely, and it will make me even more proud when it works in December 2026. But
As it works as expected.
The Mars rover we built, Rosalind Franklin, it was called, uh, and it was all kitted out and it was ready for flight, and we were ready to launch it, but it was going up on a Russian Proton rocket just as the war between Russia and Ukraine broke out. So,
Oh,
as part of the sanctions, our launch vehicle went out the window. So, it's still here. It's being re equipped because things have changed since then. And we're hoping it's going in 2028.
Bob, I don't even know where to start unpacking all of what you've just said there. I've never met a person who has worked on anything remotely as all jaw-dropping as what you have just talked about.
Yeah.
Deep space, missions to Mars, missions to Mercury, being part of that must. I, I'm struggling. I'm struggling to find the words, Bob. It must be life-changing.
Well, it sort of is, except you don't realize it at the time. Uh,
Hmm.
Speaking to you the first time you hear this, and you're saying, all right, this is jaw dropping, but you have to remember that on a project like the Mars rover, in our building alone, there'd be 200 engineers working on it, plus there'd be the
Hmm.
supply chain. So all in all, there'd be thousands of engineers all doing their little bit to make this vehicle get to Mars. And because everyone around you is also working on a vehicle to Mars, you don't think of it as anything special.
Yeah.
And the only time I've ever really noticed it was we were at a dinner party and we were talking, and somebody asked me what I was working on at the moment, and I said I'm working on this vehicle that we're going to send to Mars, and the whole table went quiet, and I thought, have I accidentally sworn and something come out? Because they all stopped and looked at me. And because you're involved in it every day, and everyone around you is also involved in the same project, and these are big projects, you don't see it as anything out of the normal
Yep.
because everyone's doing it as far as you're concerned.
Well, Bob, let me tell you, for us normal people, that is not normal.
Right.
That is not normal whatsoever. But I want to pick up on something you said about that sort of assembly line and lots of people doing lots of little tasks and lots of little pieces to come up with this big project at the end. I suppose in a way, if we pull this back even to interviewing, that's what has to happen. So if the project is the interview itself, well, there's a lot of little pieces that goes into the preparation for that interview to make it work, to make it land
Yeah.
as such. And I know we're going to come to it later on about your worst interview ever, but take me through a couple of potential other interviews that either you have been the interviewer or you have been the candidate, because there won't be too many people listening to this who would be in that sort of industry that you're in, and it's always nice to give them a little peek behind the curtain.
Yeah. I was only ever once the interviewer,
Mm.
and that happened. I told you that I never did two proper jobs. So when I decided I'd had enough of my second proper job, I went and told the managing director that I was resigning. And he said, well, we need to pick a replacement. He said, would you lead the interviewing? Which I found very strange, interviewing someone coming in for my own job. So that was a very limited experience. But the thing about being a contractor is I was doing interviews all the time. You were going in and out. And I think you also had to go in with a degree of honesty. So I've been in interviews before and they've asked me a technical question and I said, I don't know the answer. And sometimes they would say, well, have a guess. And I said, I'll try not to do that in the workplace. I tend to work with what I know. And now that might be the wrong answer in some interview, that they want you to take an educated guess. But I always felt being truthful and straightforward was the best way for me. And that was my sort of mantra, if you like. So I was all very realistic about what I could do. But something funny happens when you go to a lot of companies and you pick up a strong CV and you know a lot of people in the industry. There were 3 occasions when I never had a job interview because I knew the person who rang the department and I rang them and said, my contract here is coming to an end. Have you got anything going at your place? And on 3 occasions, they said, no, we haven't, but if you're coming free, we'll take you anyway. So
That's a huge compliment.
it is. It just shows you what reputation can do and what you can do within the organization to show your value. And I think that's an incredibly important part of interviewing, showing people that you add value to the organization. Because when they see that, then they start to see you as a part of their organization rather than just some random appendage they're going to stick on somewhere.
So how do you do that, Bob? How did you create the value that other people wanted?
I think what you have to do firstly is you have to look at the purpose of the organization, what they're trying to achieve. And for anyone who's going for an interview, my advice would be you need to do a lot of solid research. I've been asked when I've done some speaking in schools if I'll go back and see a mock interview to help the sixth formers as they get ready for interviews to go out. And I say, yeah, you have to get them to pick their ideal job before I can do that. Because unless you know your ideal job, then you're not going to do the research on the company and you're just answering questions off the cuff. And that's pretty pointless, really. But what I think you need to do is have a look. And what you see a lot in the current generations is that they are largely driven by purpose. They want a company with a good purpose. If they want to go and work for somebody, they want that company's purpose to align with their own. And I look at a lot of websites for engineering companies in particular, large engineering companies, and their website doesn't show their purpose. Pharmaceutical companies are a lot better at it. So if you look at some of them, instead of saying we make effective chemicals or whatever they do, they'll have something like our ambition is to stamp out diabetes. And then you know that you're joining a company to help stamp out diabetes. You're not going, if you're a chemical engineer, say, you're not going to do some chemical analysis and make some drugs. You're going to help stamp out diabetes.
I think they call that in the trade outcome-based marketing.
Yeah, probably.
Where they tell you what the outcome would be or can be, and then allow you to make up your own decision based on that. And for myself personally, I find that works more times than it doesn't.
Yeah.
Because somebody can actually, as you quite rightly said, they can see themselves within the company and they can see if that's a purpose worth their sacrifice, their investment in energy and time. And then they can make almost a decision based on evidence.
Yeah.
And that's a great suggestion for any of our listeners and of our audience out there at this moment in time to really get into the weeds and research the purpose, because if it aligns with your purpose, you're going to find a very happy place to be.
Well, not only will you find a happy place to be, but when you're in the interview, your enthusiasm will step up a notch because now you're driven by the same purpose. You're in line with them and they will sense that. They will understand that you're a person who wants to help them achieve. When you said about adding value, I think, say, you've got to look at what they want to achieve and you've got to put yourself in their place and think, what would they think is valuable? How can I add to the, as you say, the outcome, so that when it comes to your turn to ask questions, and people always think interviews can be one way, but they
Mm,
are clearly two way. As a candidate, you have to go in, I think, armed with your own questions, and you have to challenge the people who are interviewing you to show you that they will let you add the value that you know you bring to the table. And that, again, that's part of your research and getting ready. But when you're asking those questions, it's showing the interviewer that here's somebody who's looking at how they add value in our organization and questioning it.
yeah. And I had someone say to me just yesterday, actually, Bob, about asking questions to the interviewers. And I had asked the question of what sort of question have you been asked, because they were an interviewer. And they said, I had this weird question, but it was brilliant. And I think this touches both on the purpose and the research and asking good questions at the end. And the candidate said, the interviewer said, do you have any questions for us? And the candidate said, yes. What type of coffee do you stock in the company? And the interviewer turned to me and said, Kev, I didn't know where to go with that. She says, I was totally confused. But I was engaged and I was curious. So I asked a follow-up question of, why is it you would like to know what type of coffee? She says, I don't know what type of coffee, but why is it you would like to know? And he says, well, I want to know if it comes from a sustainable background, because just like your values, my values are high in sustainability.
Yeah,
And I thought, wow, he
yeah,
knocked that out of the park.
absolutely. Again, it shows this congruence of
Hmm.
objectives, and sometimes it doesn't. Of course, if the interviewer had replied with, "Oh, we get ours from Costco, and it's the cheapest coffee we can get,"
Yeah.
then the interviewee might have been thinking, "This is not the company for me. They're not going the way I want." And I think the research at the moment shows that the younger generation, the people who are now going into companies, are far more driven by purpose than some of the outside. I guess salary is still fairly important, but a lot of
Mm.
the benefits you see, it is the purpose that drives them, and people will change company because their purpose no longer aligns with the business they work in.
Bob, I've been there myself, where you move to a company believing that their purpose and their mission is X, you arrive and it's Y, and it just doesn't feel right.
No,
It just doesn't sit right with you. They're asking you to do things that goes against your own self-belief, morals, but it's well within theirs.
yeah,
By that stage, we probably should have moved on.
yeah, absolutely.
Companies are very good at telling you what they're good at, but actually demonstrating that behavior is something they're not always good at.
Yeah, and that's I have a funny story about a bank because I don't know if you come well, you know the Toastmasters values. For
Yep.
some reason, they're um,
Integrity first.
integrity, respect, um, excellence, and service.
Service.
Service
Yep.
and excellence. But they've got theirs IRSE as their
Yep.
acronym. But if you go into Barclays Bank uh, in Canary Wharf, you'll see on the wall they've got exactly the same set of values, but their RISE, respect, integrity, service, excellence on there.
Okay.
And so I was in Canary Wharf in Barclays giving a talk there, and I saw all these on the wall. And just for devilment, we used to in those days have a local branch of Barclays in our village. So I wheeled into the local branch, and the two ladies who had been in Barclays ever since I'd been here, so their entire careers were in Barclays in our village. And I did my business, and I said, by the way, I said, "Uh, what do you think of Barclays values?" And they both looked at one another a bit blankly. And I said, "Do you remember any of them?" And after a while, they got to rise, but it took them quite a while to work out what their values were. And this is a classic case of where rise or earth, as Toastmasters has got, looks like a great set of values,
Yeah.
but that message doesn't come from the bottom. It's the people who have sorted out the values and said, this is a great set of values for you to have, but the people at the bottom don't have that ingrained. And I have been asked to give some advice to people who are forming their values, and they said,
Mm.
"Oh, you know, come into our executive board and give a talk that will help us sort out our values." And I say, "You're asking the wrong question. You shouldn't be in the boardroom trying to sort out your values. You should go to your branch, your root and file membership, and you should ask them what values they see as adding value for the customer. And then I said,
Yeah.
you'll get a set of values that they relate to."
Makes
So,
perfect sense. Makes
yeah,
perfect sense. You know, there's no point in what you quite rightly said, sitting in the boardroom trying to come up with these, what you want them to be, but actually implementing these values. And how do you implement these values? Well, lots of these values have to be demonstrated, not just talked about.
yeah,
And if they're going to be made in such a way that it's going to be conflicting with operations, let's say, for example, they operate in a certain fashion, but they want their values to be
yeah,
something else. It's then where the conflict comes. But you know, when you're, it's funny you talked about that story. I would have done something similar with regards to different values. It was just it was a paper exercise almost for lots and lots of companies. It's to say we have values and here they
yeah,
are.
yeah.
And then when you look at what they do, not even close.
No, no,
Bob, I've got to the stage now in my life journey that I don't always believe what people say. I believe what they do.
yeah. I always think that's a far better adage, Kevin. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, because we can lie with our mouth, but it's really difficult to lie with our actions.
yeah. And it's really easy, even if they think they're being truthful, even if they think it's not a lie, it's easy to say something that you think appeases the listener, but
Mm,
not follow it through in actions.
no, no, not at all. So,
Yeah,
Bob, the time that you had your own your interview to replace yourself,
yeah.
okay? So take yourself back into that moment, and you had how many people come in for the job?
We had four good candidates. We had quite a lot of CVs, but we whittled it down to a short list of four.
Okay. Now, those four people come in. Had they come in and done one, two, or three things, they were an absolute no. And what I mean by that is, do you have your own list of three red flags that if any of those candidates come in and done any one of those three, it would have been an automatic no for you?
Well, I think the first thing I look for is this sense of realism that I value highly in my own interviews. So people who come in to pretend to be someone else for the length of the duration of the interview, I think are on a sticky wicket. And I think it's really important to be yourself when you're in an interview for a couple of reasons. Firstly, if you make up a character, if you like, for want of better words, if you make up a character to be in the interview to show the person you think that the company wants, in general, you have no idea which person the company wants. Sometimes even the companies don't have an idea who they want. You know, they get to the interview and they're selecting them on a set of criteria. But one of the best criteria is how do you fit in with the work team you're going to be working with? And, and sometimes they're the wrong character fit for the work team. They've got all the right bits. You can tick all the boxes and say, oh, yes, this person is perfectly qualified for us, but you cannot make sure they fit. I found it interesting that these big five, what they're called, the big five accounting firms who
Hmm.
do all the big audits and everything, used to pick their management consultants based on the quality of their degree, and they would only take 2-1s or firsts. And now they've dropped that criteria because they've realized that picking them on those criteria is not a good judge of whether they'll fit into the workplace.
No, no,
So,
and I've heard that myself with regards to this dropping of criteria. I think was it Elon Musk who doesn't even ask for any degrees or as long as you can do the job. And I think he gives you like a job trial. As long as you can do the job, you'll get the job.
yeah,
Which is I think is a really good way to be. But there are some organizations, and to be fair, I do want my doctor to be qualified.
yeah. You would,
You
but
know,
that's a restricted industry. It's a very high barrier to entry. You have to be qualified as a
yeah.
doctor to get in there. But there are a lot of cases where you don't know. And I always felt that this was the strength of being a contractor or a freelancer,
Uh-huh.
because you could be sacked at a week's notice. That's all they had to give you. And in fact, when you worked for some companies, that's what they did. They they would say, we've got a project starting, it's going to be 3 months and then you'll be finished. And you say, yeah, thanks very much. So you'd work 3 months or thereabouts. One day bloke would come down the office with brown envelopes. Thank you very much, Bob, we'll see you next time. And you were out. You had a week's notice and you were on your way. But the beauty of that system is when you went into the company, a you weren't a part of their political system, if you like. You weren't
Mm,
beholden to anyone for a career. You had to get on and do your job. If you did your job well, your boss wouldn't bother you. So
yep.
that was fine. You could get on with it. If the company turned out to be not the company you thought it was, and this job was different to the way they'd sold it, you could leave at a week's notice. So
Mm,
both sides knew that the balance had to be right between both sides. Otherwise, either side could walk out at a week's notice. So I think that created a very healthy environment for
mm.
working. And for those people, I know that jobs are sort of hard to come, and I've seen people talking about sending off hundreds of CVs. I think this idea of a job trial, of going in as a contractor, they don't agree to give you anything. They just agree to pay you while you're there. And if after 3 months they think you're useless, then you're out the door. If, on the other hand, after 3 months, they'll offer you a job. And I had 3 or 4 job offers in my time as a contractor. I was never seduced by the dark side, but I, but the job offers came because people recognised I was good at my job.
And
Uh,
I suppose that is very helpful, Bob, that you actually had a passion for your job,
yeah, oh,
which
for sure.
then translated into how you behaved
Yeah,
within your job as well, because you really enjoyed it. And uh, I think if we even looked at that, the Barclays and the Toastmasters rise values, you probably tick all of those boxes personally yourself. And I've known you as a person,
yeah,
and for me, you do tick those boxes.
yeah.
And
There's,
you just don't say it. You demonstrate it in your behavior.
yeah,
And that's maybe where a lot of organizations either don't take the time or don't understand to look at the behaviors of people, not what they say, not what they write in their CV. And yes, there maybe has to be a minimum standard of qualification to create a certain quality that an organization is trying to set. However, I know of people who are excellent at what they do, no qualification, but plenty of experience.
yeah. And you look for that. So going back to that job interview,
Mm,
one of the candidates who was unsuccessful was very, very bright. He was very good analytically, but he didn't seem to grasp the practicality of what we were doing. And in those days, I worked in my office. There was a small office of about 15, 20 of us. We were designing flare stacks for the petrochem work. On the back of it was the factory, and I had to take them through a tour of the factory to show them. So quite often in your day, you would be asked to go out and make a judgment on something that was happening on the shop floor, and they wanted an answer then. You couldn't say, oh, well, I'll go back and get out my calculator and work something out. They wanted to know what the issues were. So you had to know your structures very well, and a degree of practicality. And I
mm,
must tell you a little tale for when I first started. We had some very bright blokes in the office. They were mathematical. Most of them had master's degrees. Some of them had PhDs. Really good with the numbers. And I was doing a base for a grain silo in Saudi Arabia. It was going on sand, and so the base had to be very big. But because it was very big and deep, it meant that you didn't need much reinforcement in the bottom. It's what we would do is put in what's called anti-crack steel, which is just a light mesh which goes in the bottom and stops the concrete cracking. But
mm.
this chap worked out the area of the steel required, And he said, therefore use 2 1/4 inch bars. So I called him over and I said, these 2 1/4 inch bars, I said, are you really telling me that you expect them to dig a hole that's 3 meters long and 2 meters deep and 1.5 meters wide, and then take these 2 1/4 inch bars and place them in the bottom before they? And he said, but the answer's right. And I said, the answer
Mm.
isn't practical. And I said, you've got the right numeric answer, but that number should lead you to think, well, we'll just put in a nominal anti-crack steel, not to say, let's put 2 1/4 inch bars in. And so you see sometimes people who are overqualified for the job, very bright, very good at the technical analytical part of it, but they lose the connection with the practicality of what you have to do as a result. And that weeded him out of that job really, because he just couldn't see that.
And I suppose it's something that you would have seen now within the role that you do as a speaking coach. Those type of people who are highly intelligent, well qualified, heavily experienced, are not able to translate that into something practical for everybody else to understand and to go out and achieve. I've seen
Yeah,
it myself in different industries and different lines of work where they're so bright that they almost there's an expectation that everybody else is the same of in same intelligence,
yeah,
where that's not the case. And you and I both know as communicators that communication only takes place when there's understanding.
yeah, yeah. So that phenomena, if it is a phenomena, is called the curse of knowledge generally. And
Mm.
you're right, it does happen with very bright people.
Mm-hmm.
What they can't do is they can't imagine what it's like to look at their problem without the benefit of their high education and experience. And so when they're talking to people, they expect them to latch in. And you can see that happen quite quickly in workplace. If you start to work on a project, you only have to be 2 or 3 months into that project before your knowledge starts to leave all your work friends behind, all your work colleagues around, because they're not looking at it every day. They don't know it as familiarly as you do. And so, yes, they have that curse of knowledge. They're not able to put their message over.
So, Bob, what else would do you think that would be another one of your red flags? So, I mean, for me, even that curse of knowledge, and you said about the practicality, being able to translate this genius into something practical, and that there was one of the guys there that couldn't do that, and that was one of the failings or one of the reasons that he wasn't taken on.
Yeah.
But what else? What one more thing that you would
So
go,
that
not for me?
in that knowledge base, the thing I look for is whether people have rules of thumb. Whether you can look at a problem and you have a feel for it that says, well, if I do this, it's almost in the right zone, and therefore I'll know whether my answer is right or not.
Okay.
That it,
Does that come with experience then?
yeah, absolutely. Well, it sort of comes with experience, but it comes with an attitude of mind. So back in the early days, I worked on what was then the inflated Nimrod project for the government, fitting out old comets for maritime sea protection. And they did this test, and they had a whole series of loads on it, and they loaded it up and they measured the deflection, but they had no idea whether it was right, whether it was sensible.
Mm.
And in those days, we didn't have PCs on the desk, so hiring computer time was very expensive. But they wanted to hire a computer so that they could analyze this problem, which would have cost them hundreds of pounds in those days, but it's probably the equivalent of thousands of pounds today,
Mhm.
to work out this deflection in the middle. And I looked at it and I said, well, if you draw the bending moment diagram, it's almost a triangle. And I said, we know the answer to a triangle. And I worked it out and I said, well, if you treat it as a triangle, it comes to 2.5 inches. And they said, oh, we've got 2.38, so it must be right. But they were looking for this deep analytical solution. They couldn't go to a rule of thumb that put them in the right ballpark.
Yeah.
And the more we're driven by computers giving us output, the more I think it's essential to have some sanity check that you can apply to things and say, yes, the answers, it is in the right field. We expect that to be the answer. But I find even when you go in the supermarket and you know buy 3 items and the girl says, oh, that's £2.50, and you say, well, it can't because this item's £3 on its own.
Yeah.
They go, oh, well, the computer says it's £2.50, so that's what it must be. If it comes out
Yeah.
of the computer, it's right, Kevin.
Yeah, yeah, no, I've been there myself. I've seen it myself, and I've just sort of looked with real confusion, going, "Well, if this is a pound, and this is a pound,
Yeah,
and this is a pound, how can it be £5?"
yeah, no, and
Because the
it's that,
computer said it was five. Okay.
yeah, so- and it's that ability to look at things and know whether they make sense or whether they don't, which I sometimes think is missing. My third red flag would be what I would consider a lack of caring. People who turn
Mm,
up as if they think they've already got the job and they've got everything. They probably haven't made much effort to look into what the company does. And when you're asking them questions about how you want them to fit into your organization, it's clear that they don't understand your business. Now, fair enough, someone who comes for an interview isn't going to understand all of your business, but you should be able to gauge from the questions you ask them whether they've taken the time and effort to look into it and see what you do and where you do it and how that might impact things, so that when you ask them the question, you get a sensible answer back.
yeah. And like you said about asking the right questions. And I
Yeah,
think that sometimes is where interviews fall down. I have seen far too often someone applying for a job based on the job description, doing the research based on the job description, but the job isn't actually what was on the job description. I've
no,
seen it more times than not, Bob.
yeah,
It seems to be a bit of a pandemic that we just go cut and paste and send it out because that person who was doing that job for that amount of years, well, that's the space we need to fill.
yeah,
However, that person's job may have evolved over the years, and they
yeah,
haven't taken the time to actually see what are the basics that we need.
yeah,
And I see that far too often with job descriptions and in businesses, because it's much easier to go cut and paste, copy, throw it in there, hope that they get the right candidate. And the more I hear and the more I listen to recruiters and recruitment firms and businesses at this moment in time going, there are no good people out there. When I look at their job descriptions, I can understand why. Sometimes when you read a job description, it's very clear what they want. It's also very clear what they'll give you in return. But a lot of organizations are always just saying, this is what we want you to have, and don't talk about anything. Lots of job descriptions now don't even give you the salary that you're
no,
going to get. They
no,
give you sometimes a range or nothing at all.
yeah,
So it'd be hard. I can understand why not a lot of people will apply. And the people that do apply are usually people who have done a little bit of research or within that field already. And
yeah,
all they're doing is taking a sideward step from one company to the next company instead of potentially having someone move up within. But it's because they've always did what they've always done. They expect they always get what they've always got.
yeah, yeah.
It's
So I think
insanity.
averaging is a big problem in certainly in large companies,
Mm,
because what they do is if you've got 10 people doing the same job, they've all got the same job description. And if one of them goes, they use that job description. But
that's
within that team, you could find they have very different roles. But to the people doing the hiring, there is only one job description. And
it.
often that job description isn't driven by the people who employ the team. So
Yep.
so their sense of what I want to fill that bloke who's going isn't taken up in the job description and the candidates they've seen.
Mm.
Yeah,
So it's a good way to look at that, Bob. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. It is averaging that's the problem. You know, people want their own little patterns that says this is what we hire for that grade of person doing that job, but there's a
Mm.
lot of variation in there.
Well, it's quite dangerous, isn't it? Patterns can be very useful, but they can also be quite a detriment to business and success, even to
Yeah,
health for that matter,
yeah.
making
So
those assumptions.
there was a technique years ago called zero-based budgeting for people who were budgeting projects, because what they found was exactly as you were describing with the interview and the job description. People would do a project and they'd have the pricing there, and then they do the next project and they'd start with the pricing from the last one and tweak it, and then they go on and tweak it, and so you ended up with this project budget that was not relating to the project that was being asked for. And the
Mm.
point about zero-based budgeting is that you throw away everything you've got and start from the beginning again and work out exactly what is wanted. And that often leads to a very different result from the thing that's being dragged forward and modified.
Probably more accurate.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. But it
Probably more
takes
accurate.
more work, you see. People take the shortest route. If you've got a ready-made project budget and it's easy just to tweak the figures you think that are different, that's really quick and simple. Whereas the zero-based approach takes more time and costs more. So people avoid it. People go for the shortest route of resistance.
Yeah. Well, it's just life, Bob, I think,
Yes.
for lots of
Yeah,
people.
for
And,
sure.
and it's why some people are successful and some people aren't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I see that in every walk of life, not just business. I mean, in general life. And usually the easy way ends up turning out to be the wrong way.
It's certainly rarely the best way.
Absolutely.
Sometimes, of course, people get away with it, and that justifies their belief that it's the right way.
You must know my children.
Everyone's children.
Yeah, probably. Bob, we're gonna move on to a different sort of tempo now. So here is what we call the quick fire round. For anybody
Right.
that hasn't listened or watched before, this is the quick fire round where we will give questions to Bob that I have been asked myself by my own clients. All Bob can say is yes, no, or pass. That's it. Yes, no, or pass. So, Bob, are you ready?
Yeah. Shoot.
Is it acceptable to wear pajama bottoms to a Zoom interview?
Yes.
Is it okay to bribe the interviewer?
No.
Is it okay to ask for a selfie at the end of the interview?
No.
Should a candidate smile during the interview?
Yes.
Should you answer the first question with a dramatic pause for effect?
Pass.
Should women wear high heels to an interview?
Pass.
Is it acceptable to ask the interviewer how much they make?
No.
Should you high five the interviewer at the end of the interview?
No.
Should a candidate swear during the interview?
No.
And is it acceptable to bring your mum to the interview for moral support?
No.
No. Well, Bob, that's it. What did you
Right.
think of those?
Yes, they were good questions. Some of them are heavily loaded. The one about high heels
Hmm.
uh, has so many variables in it. It will depend what the office is like, what the general staff wear during the working day, what other people wear, whether it's a very formal attire and it suits, or whether it's better to be comfortable in there. So there is no real answer to that question.
Mm.
It
It's a question that I use during a lot of my workshops. And the reason I do it is to engage the audience for one, but also to create an argument and show what one comment can do to a room.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
it completely cuts a room in half by gender straight away because the men don't want to answer, usually, because they don't want to be seen one way or the other. And then within the women, that almost splits them in half as well. The ones
Yeah,
that are for it and the ones that are against it.
yeah,
And it is such a great, as you said, loaded question. It is such a good question, but it is a real engagement piece for lots
yeah.
of people. But I get asked that at least once a week, Bob.
I can see how engaging it is, and if it leads to engagement and discussion, I think that's brilliant. As an engineer, I would say there's not enough data to solve it.
Well, Bob, hopefully one day I will be able to answer that question based on evidence.
Right.
because pretty much, as I said, every single week I get asked the same question. But I do also ask this question of everyone I meet in a workshop, or most of my workshops, depending on the workshop. And I will also ask this to both male and females to see how that sort of lands with them. Because I am really interested, because it is one of those questions that is quite divisive.
Yeah,
But I think the answer is it depends.
yeah,
That's really it. It depends. It depends on the industry. It just depends on the expectations of that industry. It
yeah,
depends if you feel comfortable in them. It depends if you feel powerful in them.
yeah,
Because everybody has a lucky watch or a lucky pen or a lucky pair of high heels.
yeah,
So there's a lot of it depends when it comes to this. So,
yeah,
for example, if the standard is within, or the expectation within the industry is that all women wear high heels, then there's almost an expectation that that's how you should turn up.
yeah,
However, if there is not that expectations, but you can if you want, then that's a choice.
yeah,
That's a choice, and I love even getting asked that question myself. Whenever a client of mine asks, because I sort of smirk and go, okay, let's peel this back a little. Why is it they need to understand if that is okay or appropriate,
yeah.
or seemingly appropriate?
No, I can see it's a good lead into great discussion, but just for clarity, I don't have a lucky pair of high heels.
So yours are unlucky, is that what you're saying?
No, no.
Bob, you wouldn't need them. You're tall enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're quite tall. Okay.
But there are times, when they look great when you're in business dress, and as you say, a sense of power goes with it. Often they are really the right footwear to wear to that event, whatever it is.
Hmm.
Yeah,
But again, it's always that depends, isn't it?
yeah, absolutely.
Depends on the person, depends on the industry, depends on the expectations, and even the perceived expectations as well.
Yeah.
It's a real minefield. It's a real minefield. But now let's get off this minefield a little bit, okay? And we'll go to something a little bit more fun. Let's go to your worst interview ever, Bob. Okay? So, Bob, over to you, sir.
All right. Well, my worst interview, I think I told you that I'd always been quite good at interviews, but that was because I put in a lot of practice. So that one's quite hard for me. I can tell you my first job, I didn't have an interview at all. I worked for my uncle in the Yorkshire forests. My father was moving out of the army and finding a new house, so he bundled me off to Yorkshire for 6 months to work with my uncle, who was a forester. And my first job was out spragging trees, for which he gave me a £10 felling axe and a chainsaw. And he gave me the health and safety chat. He said, "Come back with all thy fingers, lad." And that
Oh,
was it.
okay. That's wise
Sound
words, to
advice.
be fair. Yep.
Yeah.
It's
And
probably more than you would get now, Bob.
I absolutely loved that job. That was another job that I loved. It was wonderful working outside. But when my father eventually moved and I went to live with him in Hemel, one day he had the temerity to suggest I needed to get a job. And I thought, oh, well, I better think about it. In those days, we had the youth employment offices. And I
Hmm.
went down there and the chap said, "What do you like doing?" And I said, "Well, we used to do a lot of map drawing and that sort of thing. I quite enjoyed that." So he said, "We have some draftsman job for you." And I said, as I believe engineering was never on the horizon for me at this stage. So he said, "We've got two interviews." He said, "We've got one in Hemel and one in Berkhamsted. You can go to Hemel in the morning and Berkhamsted in the afternoon." And unlike all the advice, the sage advice I've given you, I had no research, no idea where I was going or what I was doing. And I turned up at this first one, which I think was probably the worst one. And they showed me around the office, and I really had no clue what was going on. So I guess I came over as fairly clueless in this. And at one stage, the chap said to me, he said, "Do you really know what a draftsman does?" And I said, "No, not really. They just sent me from the youth employment office," which was not another great selling point.
No, no.
No,
Well, it goes back to what you said about being authentic and honest.
yeah,
Well,
yeah. I don't think he appreciated that so much. So he said, well, the draftsmen draw out the shape of the design and the engineers work out the steel, and the steel gets bent and we put it in shutters and then fill the shutters with concrete and you have your structure. So I said, oh, right, okay. So probably not enough enthusiasm in that. And I came out, and it will come as no surprise to you that I didn't get that job. However, I'm nothing if not a quick learner, because in the afternoon, I went to the other interview in Berkhamsted, and in showing me around the draftsman's office and all the rest, he said, do you know what we do here? And I said, well, I think the draftsman draws the shape of the design and the engineers work out the steel and they bend the steel and put it in the shuttering and then you pour the concrete in. He said, you know quite a lot about this. And to my eternal shame, I said, yes, I've been reading up about it. And with that, he offered me the job.
Oh my goodness. I think I don't know what the lesson here, Bob, is. I'm
Well,
not sure what we can share with our audience, but I'm not sure what that lesson is.
well, some of it cuts across my authenticity and honesty that I mentioned earlier.
Listen, with what do they say? With age comes wisdom.
Is what?
With age comes wisdom.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, actually, in that case, it was only about 4 hours.
Well, you were still older than the first time you went into the first
Well,
one.
that's true. Yeah. So you can have bad interviews, but you can also learn from them. You can see what are people looking for that I didn't know. And that's why I think it's always great just to go out and do job interviews and see what goes on, because then you start to understand how you are as a person and how you relate to the people who are looking for employees.
And that's it. And it's even when I think about you and what you do with regards to the speaking coach and your Toastmasters, one of the main points that is always made in Toastmasters is know your audience.
Mm,
Know your audience so that you can design your speech to make an impact on your audience. It's no different than in an interview.
yeah. No,
Know your
absolutely.
audience.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? Research. Ask
Yeah. Yeah.
around. It's even easier today than it was probably, Bob, in your day, where we can jump onto LinkedIn.
Yeah. There was no
Today's
internet in my day.
oh,
Mobile phones hadn't been invented yet, Kevin.
Bob, you're giving away your age. You're giving away your age. Well, I too grew up in an age that started off with no mobile phones, but I think I was 14 or 15 when I got my first mobile.
Oh, right. No, I was older than that. I'm not giving it away, but I was older than 14 or 15, I can tell you.
But it's when we think about this preparation and the opportunities we have, there's almost no excuse anymore
No,
for
no.
people to come in underprepared.
No, you can be so well informed, and nowadays we have AI, and if you use AI sensibly, it can be, if you ask it intelligent questions, it can give you some really strong frameworks to think about your own answer. So it will
Mm,
probably never come up with exactly what you feel and what you would say, but it can give you a steer into thinking about the framework of what's a good answer and putting your own information into it.
absolutely, absolutely, and it's something I would always advise my even my own clients because a lot of them they go for the behavioral interviews, which are something that they did in the past, and putting it into a structure makes it easy for them to remember. Because what I tend to find is that an interview seems to come across as a memory game almost, which for some people is really difficult.
Yeah,
Other
sure.
people it's really easy. But putting it into a bit of a structure and something that's easy to remember, even a mnemonic, so that you can just remember it quite easily, helps people and helps make it sticky. So that's why the star method is very, very popular. Because it's
Yeah,
a very, very
sure.
simple method. But what I
That's
tend to
right.
find is it was lacking, Bob. It had lacked something, and with the interviews that I do, and with at the levels that I work at, the people are looking something more. So I created this star plus R, which
Right.
was a second R, which was reflection.
Yeah.
Because one is normally the follow-up question to most answers is, what did you learn from that? What did you
What
take
do
away
you
from
learn?
that? What are you going to do differently?
Yeah.
So if you're adding that in, and quite a few of my clients have come back to me and said, Kevin, they actually commented how reflective I am
Right.
because it never happens.
Yeah.
So they were standing out for the right reason.
Yeah.
And even when they're asked for feedback, when they get the job. And you should always ask for feedback, even if you get the job,
Yeah.
because then you'll know what you've done well and what you can better do next time.
Yeah, sure.
But almost 90% have said they mentioned reflection. They mentioned that you reflected and didn't just give me the result. It reflected what you were going to do differently the next time. Not
Yeah.
better, not worse, just differently, or what you were going to carry forward.
So I think the star structure, which is one that we use in speaking, is really good for answering the question, what did you do?
Yeah.
But if you're asked about your opinion, what do you think? Then I prefer PREP, proposition, reason, example, proposition as a structure. So you start off with your proposition. This is so if someone says, what do you believe about sending people to Mars? You start off with your proposition. I think it's good to explore future planets or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
And then your reason, we're perhaps running out of resources on this planet and we need to explore other planets to see if there's something there that will help us. And then perhaps an example, which is the E in PrEP, an example. For instance, they've sent a rover to Mars and they've already found that there are potential traces of water, which may mean we can turn it into an inhabitable planet. And then back to your proposition to finish off. And that's why I think space exploration to Mars is a good thing. So it's a
It's
really simple structure and it answers the question, what do you think, rather than what do you do, which star answers.
it's it's easy when you structure things.
Yeah.
And when you actually look at most of our conversations, they are structured. We just don't
Oh, yeah.
realize the structure.
Yeah.
And it's why when the structure isn't in the right order, we notice.
Yeah.
But we don't always notice when it's in the right order. We only notice when it's not.
Yeah. Well, we're very good at seeing by exception rather than seeing everything that's good. And when you're learning evaluation, that's the one thing you have to do is focus on what they did really well rather than the exception of what they did poorly, which most people will pick up on.
Yeah. And
Those structures are called advanced organizers. And so
oh,
it allows your brain very simply to put the information in the right place. So if you have a structure in your head, then it's easy to put your answer to get together. Whereas if you have no structure, you tend to ramble and move about.
that makes perfect sense. It's that filing cabinet we have in our heads, isn't it, for storing of the information?
Yeah.
Bob, this has been absolutely amazing. I have learned so much from yourself today. I know our listeners will have taken so much away from today. There was a lot of information. So I'm going to have the really difficult job of trying to pick out three really important takeaways that I would like our audience to take away, especially when it comes to interviewing, talking, and moving forward within their career. The very first one that I want to mention is what you had said about the authenticity, the honesty, and the realism, and showing up as you and who you truly are, because it is so important. Second thing is about researching the company. And in these times, there is no excuse for not researching the company. You are normally not given an interview the very next day when you apply for one, so you have a little bit of time in between. Most individuals have a phone at this moment in time. I'm not saying everybody does, but most do. And if they don't, they have access to internet somewhere. But they can go and do these things.
Yeah.
And the third thing, which I thought was really, really touching almost, but almost it was you in a sense, that lack of caring, showing up as if you don't really care, showing up as if I've got this job already. People, as the interviewers and the businesses, want you to make an effort. And I know it's a two-way street now, but they still want to make you an effort, or
Yeah.
still want you to make an effort for them. And I know some people are really against that. And I've spoken to many of people going, well, Kevin, why do I have to do this? And the way I would always explain this to them is interviewing is like a game. There are rules, there are unspoken rules, and there are rules that everybody can read. If you know what those unspoken rules are, which is why you come to an interview coach like me, to help you find those unwritten and unspoken rules. If you know that what they are, why would you not use them to get yourself and give yourself the best opportunity you can?
Yeah.
And some people are going, well, Kevin, that's not me. And I would always say then, well, maybe this organization isn't for you because it doesn't align with your values. It doesn't align with your purpose or your mission. Maybe the organization isn't the right fit. And sometimes that's what happens. People actually come to that realization within our sessions and go, do you know what, Kevin? I never thought about that. You may be right. This is not the right place for me. Can we have a talk about my values? And then can we look for organizations that have those values? Because I want to go to somewhere that wants me as much as I want them. And it's a really, really, really lovely thing. Bob, if people want to reach out and contact you, where can they find you?
Easiest way is to email me, bob@bobferguson.co.uk. bobferguson.co.uk is my website, so they can look up and see what I do. But it's easiest to email me.
Brilliant. And you'll also find Bob's information in the show notes that accompany the show as well. Bob, thank you very much for today.
Pleasure, Kevin.
It's completely my pleasure. Let me say it's completely. Now, make sure everybody comes back again for our next episode, where we will have another little peek behind the curtain. We've had somebody who has sent probes to Mars and to Mercury today. You just never know who we're going to have on next. Because on the other side of a successful interview is the life you all deserve.
For more details about our guest, or if you would like to be a guest, go to www.interviewskillscoach.co.uk/myworstinterviewever, or find us on Facebook or LinkedIn. And remember, on the other side of a successful interview is the life you deserve.